Begin the current Daf Masechus Eruvin Daf Memvav. We begin 5 lines down at the top of the Amid, where we continue the discussion of the previous Daf regarding Machlekes in our Mishnah. If someone's sleeping, does he get 2,000 amas? Does he get only dalad amas? And exactly how much of those dalad amas does he get? Something that we're going to be speaking about is this halacha. Who do we follow like? And specifically that the halacha is kemekel be'eruv. We follow like the lenient interpretation when it comes to laws of Erev, and also halacha kemekel be'avel. The halacha is like the lenient interpretation of that of an avel. Primarily, we're going to discuss regarding why do we have to say that halacha is like a certain opinion in two different ways. And then the Gemara is going to discuss certain klolim regarding halacha. When you have a certain machlekes tanaim, who do we pass like, and do we follow that in practice? So begin the current Daf, 5 lines down at the top of the Amid. Amr Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. He says halacha is Rabbi Ben Nuri. Again, we have this machlekes regarding someone that's sleeping on the road. How much is this Chum Shabbos? So then the Gemara says that halacha is like Rabbi Ben Nuri, that a sleeping person is kind of shvisa, gets 2,000 dollars. On that, Rabbi Shloimy he says beferish shmeilach. He says, did you hear this explicitly from Rishon Levi, or machlola shmeilach, or did you hear this inferentially? In other words, you heard him say something else, and from that you inferred that obviously he holds like Rabbi Ben Nuri. So Malay said to beferish shmeilach. He says, I explicitly heard from him. He told me directly that the halacha follows like Rabbi Shloimy Levi, like Rabbi Ben Nuri. But then says the Gemara, my klala. What was the havamina? From what general statement could he have inferred that he heard from Rishon Levi to say that obviously he held like Rabbi Ben Nuri? Says the Gemara because he asked this question because it could have been inferred from a different statement. Rishon Levi says Allah follows like a lean interpretation of laws of Erev in all its halachas. Now, Tchumen is from the halachas of Eruvin, and therefore we would know that the halachas is like Rabbi Ben Nuri because when you're sleeping on the road, we had stringent interpretations, that of saying you get only daled amas, and some say even only get 2 amas in each direction, and he was the most lenient interpretation, saying the sleeping person gets 2,000 amas. So maybe from that statement of halacha Gedivran Mekel, you would have thought to say from there. So he asked him, was it machlala or beferish? And he says, no, beferish. I heard him explicitly say halacha is like Rabbi Ben Nuri. But that says the Gemara, wait a second. Batarti lamali. Then why was it necessary to say both these teachings? If you already said halacha is like the mekel, so I already know halacha is like Rabbi Ben Nuri. Why does Rabbi Shloimy Levi have to go then say explicitly halacha is like Rabbi Ben Nuri? So the Gemara has 3 different interpretations for this question. Amr B'Zeir says it was necessary to say both of these statements. The Yashmin halacha Rabbi Ben Nuri, had you only said halacha is like Rabbi Ben Nuri, that you get 2,000 amas as a sleeping person, Hafmin, I would have said that halacha Rabbi Ben Nuri is bein lekulam. Whether as leniency, for example, it's a leniency when you have a sleeping person, because if he doesn't have a shvisa, he can't leave his daled amas. But I would also say that bein lechumra, that Rabbi Ben Nuri's halacha would also be as a stringency. How so? When you have a kli hafker, an ownerless item, let's say a bowl that's ownerless. If you say a sleeping person, as we had said in the previous Daf, Rabbi Ben Nuri's halacha is the same thing for something that's ownerless, that has no intent for a shvisa. If you would say it would be kind of shvisa, now you wouldn't be able to move this bowl to the place where you yourself made an erev to. You'd only be able to go 2,000 amas in every direction of the bowl. Kamash Malan, that's what needed his other statement to say halacha v'divra mekel be'erev. No, the halacha is only like the lenient interpretation of the laws of erev. By a person, the halacha is like a Ben Nuri, where since if he'd be awake, he would have an acquisition, so when he's sleeping also. But regarding Kalim, then the halacha does not follow like him, so you need both statements. You're right, the halacha is only Rabbi Ben Nuri in the halacha of our Mishnah regarding sleeping, as a leniency, but as a stringency, the halacha does not follow like him. But that says the Gemara, okay, but then only say the other statement. Say the halacha is like the lenient interpretation by the laws of Erev, and halacha Rabbi Ben Nuri lomali. Then why do you need to say halacha is like Rabbi Ben Nuri? By just saying halacha is like the mekel, I would know, okay, by 2,000 amas by the sleeping person you do get, and by the chavtzei hafker, by the kli that's ownerless, it doesn't get. Says the Gemara, it was necessary to say both, because you would have thought to say hanamili, when do we say that halacha is going to be like the lenient interpretation? It's yachid b'makom yachid, is when you have one Tana disagreeing with another Tana, over Rab Makam Rab, or many disagreeing with many. But if you have one person like Rabbi Ben Nuri, who's disagreeing with many, which we see in our Mishnah that the Rabbanan disagree with him, I would say that Allah would not follow like him, even though he's a leading interpretation by Erev. And some of you says have the word here, Kamash Malan. That's what we needed Rabbi Shloimy Levi to say, though that even though we hear that Allah is going to be like Rabbi Ben Nuri, even though he's a Yachad Makam Rabbim, we're still going to follow his leading interpretation. However, on this interpretation, this answer, the first answer of the Gemara's question, Amalei Rav Abai. Rav has a difficulty with this answer. He says, Mechti, let's see. Eruvin is Draban. Eruvin is rabbinic law. Biblically, there is no such law. Mali yachid b'makam yachid. So what's the difference if you have one Tana disagreeing with one Tana, or Mali yachid b'makam Rabbim? Who cares? Wait, why are you telling me that you need to have both teaching of Shimon Levi? Because if you only had the one of halacha gediv Rabbi Mekel be'erev, you would say, oh, maybe we don't follow like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri here, even though he's a leading interpretation. Because yachid b'makam Rabbim says Rabbi, I don't understand this, because it's rabbinic law erev tchumen, and by rabbinic law, who cares if it's yachid b'makam Rabbim? Why would you need to have the other teaching for? To which the Gemara says, only a popular Rava, they reject Rava's contention. They reject his question. What? The Gemara brings two proofs that, no, even by rabbinic law, we would be concerned if it's a Yachid B'Makam Rabbim, and we generally would not rule like that if we had to say the other statement of Shimon Levi, that halacha falls like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because we would not have said halacha gediv Rabbi Mekel when it's Yachid B'Makam Rabbim. What's the first right? What's not? Because we're in the Mishnah Masechtas neither. Rabbi Shloimy says, "Kol isha she'avala shalosh einos." Any woman that had she passed 3 periods, which is 90 days. Generally, a woman's eina, a period, is for having nida for her menstrual cycle is every 30 days. So any woman that passes 3 months, 90 days, and she doesn't have any dam, she's called nistalik dameha. We presume that she's not going to have a flow of blood. Now, if she subsequently does see dam, so then we say what's called daya shaita. We say, now it's sufficient, the moment right now. Now she saw dam, but we're not going to go ahead and say that the taharas that she touched for the last 24 hours are going to be retroactively tummy, which is generally the halacha by regular women. A regular woman, who she can become a need at any point in time, we say what's called demain mitzvin. She has blood in her uterus at all times, where we say we don't know when it happened. We say the last 24 hours, now we find it, now she has the real dam, but we say the last 24 hours, could be she had it, because the Gemara says in the beginning of Niddav Gimel and Elaf, we're concerned that what's called the Beis HaRechem, by the uterus, there's an area of the walls inside where it could have already came out of the uterus, but it's in the vaginal canal, it just didn't come out all the way out yet. Which the Mishnah teaches over there in Niddav Mem, that all women are actually metame once it's already bebeis hachitzim. In the vaginal canal, it's already metame, it's already out of the uterus, out of the rechem. Now, so we're saying, although we're only seeing it now, it could have been there already in the vaginal canal in the last 24 hours, we can say the towers are going to be tummy. Now, on that we're saying, but this woman who didn't have a period for 3 months, we say, okay, there's already chazaka that she's not having dam, we presume that what we see now is what we see now, we don't presume the last 24 hours. Now the Rabbanan disagree, and they say that no, just having 3 periods of not seeing dam was only said for an elderly woman. An elderly woman that had passed already 3 periods near her old age, then we say that, okay, daya shaita. But a young woman, then we don't say the daya shaita. Now, Betanya, that was so that's they disagree with Rabbi Lazar. So Betanya lived in the Brisa. Ma'isavasa Rebbe Rabbi Lazar. What happened was that Rebbe went and he ruled like Rabbi Lazar, where he said that even a young woman, a 25-year-old woman, he said, she didn't have a period for 3 months already, so now she saw dam right now, and 3 hours ago she was handling taras. So that says Rebbe, okay, you could say like Rabbi Lazar, and the taras in the last 24 hours is not going to be tummy. The problem is, after Rebbe remembered, now it sounds like when it says he remembered, it sounds like he remembered he did something wrong. He says, okay, you know what, Kedai Rebbe Lazar lismach la b'shas tzchak. That it's worthy, Rebbe Lazar, to rely on him in a situation of challenge, because it was a famine, it was a hunger year, and if they would have made the Taharas Tameh, it would have been a great loss. So he says, okay, you can rely on him b'shas tzchak. Says the Gemara, what does it mean after he remembered? If it means to say that he remembered, and halacha does not follow like Rabbi Lazar, rather like Rabbanan, meaning that there was a machlekes, and halacha was said like Rabbanan, and when he did it, he didn't remember that halacha falls like Rabbanan, and now he remembers. So wait a second, why wouldn't he undo his ruling? Then how in a difficult situation could he do like him if the halacha doesn't follow? Halacha doesn't follow. Ella, rather, says the Gemara, obviously the reason why he didn't retract his ruling was because the loyat merhel chasa. Halacha wasn't said definitively, like Rabbi Lazar, but like Rabbanan. So what does it mean that niska, that he remembered? After he recalled that it wasn't just one other time that disagreeing with Rabbi Lazar. Rather, there was the majority that would disagree with him, and he should have done like the Rabbim. That's what he says, but you know what? It wasn't that we explicitly ruled like the Rabbim, but so it says, okay, so he's worthy to rely in a situation of extreme circumstances because it was a famine year. And therefore he did not retract his ruling. So what it sounds like is, but if it wasn't b'shas tzchak, then he would not have done like Rabbi Lazar. Obviously, you see that even though the halacha of what's called me'es le'es of saying whatever the woman touched in the last 24 hours, is only a rabbinic decree, because it's just a rabbinic concern. And still you see, you really have to do like the rabbin. So you see, not like Rabb's question. You see that yes, we needed the other teaching of Rabbi Shimon Levi to tell you halacha like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because just saying halacha b'divrei mekel would not be true, because you would think that you would not say like the mekel when it's a yachid makam ram, because you see, but even by rabbinic law, you generally don't follow like the yachid b'makam the rab. Amar Mashash l'Rabba, and then again, Rabbi Mashash, he also brings another raya, not like Rabba. Some say Rabbi Nachman Yitzchak the Rabba. He says, what do you think? In rabbinic law, you don't differentiate if it's an individual Tana in contrast to another individual Tana, ben Yachid makam Rabba, and whereas when it's individual Tana to the majority, and that's why you're asking why you need both teachings. But Tanya will learn the Brayso, the following halacha. Shmuel Kareva, if someone heard a recent tiding that someone passed away, one of his close relatives, Neheg is Shiva, so he has the law of Shiva, which is he's not allowed to bathe, and he's not allowed to wash his clothing, Ushleishim, and he has the halacha of what's called for Shleishim, the 30 days of cutting his hair and for pressing his garments from the day that he hears the Besura. Rechaika, if it's a distant tiding, it's only going to apply the Avelis for one day. Now, says the Bryce of what does it mean, a recent tiding or a distant news? But if it's within 30 days when the person passed away, that's called Kreva. That's called a recent tiding, and you'll have the regular laws of Shiva and Shleishim. But if it's already after 30 days that the person passed away, Rechayka is already called a far news, and therefore you only have the Shiva and the Shleishim for one day. That's the Rebbe Kiva. Now, the sages, they disagree. They say, no, Achashmu, Kreva, Achashmu, Rechayka, it doesn't make a difference if it happened a short time ago, happened a long time ago. The Haggash Shiva and Shleishim, you have the laws of Shiva and Shleishim. Now, and again, this is all leading just for the proof that we're about to bring. He says, wherever you find that the individual Tana is lenient and the majority is stringent, the halacha follows like the majority stringent opinion. Except for over here, and although Rabbi Kiva is the lenient one, and the sages are the majority are stringent, halacha is going to follow Rabbi Kiva. Why? Why here would it be different? So it says the Gemara, because the Savala, Rabbi Yechanan holds Kishmul, the Mashmul, he says, halacha yidivra mekel be'evel. Halacha following the lead interpretation, and anyone who knows, who never had Avelis, knows this, we do follow, this is a dictum that is used a lot, we follow like the lead interpretation regarding to the laws of mourning. Now, but the Gemara makes the following inference. Sounds like by Avelis or the Kila Baraban. It sounds like by mourning, we're going to go like the lead interpretation. Av B'Alma, but in general, Afila b'drabanan, that even by rabbinic law, shani ben yachid makam yachid, they were going to differentiate between an individual Tana disagreeing with an individual Tana, ben yachid ben makam rabbin, regarding an individual disagreeing with a majority, because only over here by Avelis, then we're going to go like the leading interpretation. But by other rabbinic law, then we're going to go, because this is not biblical, the Shiva and the Shleishim, this is rabbinic law, and we see only over here halacha yidivra mekel. But in general, when you have the Yachid b'makam Rabbin, like Rabbi Kiva was, only over here, but the Avelis can be lenient. But in general, by other rabbinic law, we're going to be machmer. So again, you had two proofs that answer Rabba's question. Rabba had asked us, why do you need? The first interpretation said that had we only said halacha yidivra mekel be'eruv, we would have said it's only the Yachid b'makam Yachid. Then we follow, but by Yachid b'makam Rabbin we don't follow. So if we had to say halacha yidivra ben Nuri, Rabba disagrees. He says, no. What do you mean? What do you mean? It's rabbinic. So of course you would go l'kula. Another Gemara two proofs that no, you see that even by the halacha, by rabbinic law, you would generally not say Yachid Makam Ram. There's only two times that you say, two exceptions, you will go like the lenient halacha Kedivra Mekel be'eruv and halacha Kedivra Mekel be'aval, and therefore we needed the other teaching of Rabbi Shimon Levi too. Now the Gemara continues on the base with a second answer of the three answers of the Gemara's question. For Papa, he says, it's going back on the question we had asked on Rabbi Shimon Levi. He said two things which are seemingly the same idea. He said, halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and he said, halacha is Kedivra Mekel be'eruv. Well, that's the same thing. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is the leading interpretation of when you're sleeping on the road, if you get 2,000 amas or dalad amas. So he says, no, it was necessary to say both teachings. Why? So you would have thought to say, Hanamili, when do we say halacha is like the Mekel is be'eruv b'chatzeris? Is by, there's two types of Eruvin. There's Eruv Chatzeris, which you join together all the different neighbors in that courtyard. And that's where we would have said halacha is like the Mekel. But by the laws of an Eruv of a Tchuma, which is a different Eruv, it's an Eruv of joining, it's mixing together your boundaries of limit how far you're allowed to walk on Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was by Isra Tchumen, then I would say, that halacha would not be like the lead interpretation. Therefore, you have to say, not only halacha gedibra mekel, which I would have thought that means only be'eruv chatzeres, but I have to say halacha gedibra menuri, which is by tchumen. And says the Gemara, how do we know that there is such a difference? What do you mean? If you're saying that halacha is like the mekel by eruv, which eruv chatzeres, why would I say eruv tchumen is different? They're both rabbinic law. So the Gemara, it's not like we learned in the Mishnah later on, per chalanta pei alpha and base, that you see there is a difference between the eruv tchumen and the eruv chatzeres. Because Amar B'Yehuda says, when do we say this, that you don't make an eruv for a person only if he knows and he's willing? That's a beruv tchumen. That's by when you're making a tchumen, you can't just make for someone else without his knowledge because it might be bad for him. What happens is, although you're making more space where he can walk in one direction, but then he loses the other direction because now you're getting another 2,000 amas to the east, but now you can't go to the west. So then you can't just do it without his knowledge. But if let's say you're joining him together as being part of the cul-de-sac that he could carry, there's no loss over there, there's just a gain. So then you can make the eruv for him in the chatzeres, whether he knows about it or he doesn't know about it. Why? Because you can marry a person even if he's not there. You cannot make a liability for someone unless he's there. So you see that we're more stringent by eruv tchumen than eruv chatzeres, and therefore you would have thought to say halacha is like the mekel by eruv chatzeres, and therefore we have to tell you halacha menuri even regarding that of eruv tchumen. That was the second interpretation. Now the Gemara brings the third and final interpretation. Daf Yomi, he says, it's necessary to say both the teaching of Rabbi Shloimy Levi, that halacha is like the mekel be'eruv, and also halacha is Rebbe Menuri regarding the 2,000 amas, the shvisa of the sleeping person. Because you would have thought to say, when do we say that the halacha is like the mekel by Ruba Chatzeres is b'shiur eruv, is by the leftovers of the eruv. We'll see later on in this Masechta that if someone, let's say, left an eruv in a protected place for many Shabbosos, and then the food got diminished from being the 2 meals worth, although you have to have 2 meals worth for your eruv, but we're lenient to validate it, even though now it doesn't have 2 meals worth anymore. It's what's called shiur eruv. So then I would have said Allah is like the lenient interpretation, because we see leftovers of the eruv is less of a stringency. But regarding the machlekes, regarding the initial eruv, I would say that no, you shouldn't go after the lead interpretation. And Rabbi Menuri regarding the sleeping person was like tchilas eruv, because it's like making his eruv tchuma now for the first time. So therefore I have to tell you, not only halacha gedivra mekel, which I would have thought is only by the shiur eruv, Kamash Malan, that to tell you halacha gedivra menuri, even by what's called tchilas eruv. And says the Gemara, and how do we know that there is such a difference between the leftovers of the eruv that were more lenient than that of making initial eruv? There's none, which are Mishnah later on of payment base. Amar Bisi says, when do we say this? That you need to have a shiur for eruv chatzeres, which is either 2 meals worth for everybody, or a gregor, like a dried fig, for every single person, which is a shiur. There's at least a minimum of how much you need to have, either a sum total for each person. That is b'tchilas eruv, says the Mishnah. That's only the initial making of the eruv. B'shiur eruv, but the leftovers of the eruv fill a kol shur, that even if you have a minute amount for every single person, is going to be sufficient. So you see that there's a difference between shiur eruv, which you only need literally just a minute amount, and tchilas eruv, which does have a minimum measurement. And the Mishnah there continues, it says, they didn't say to make an eruv chatzeres with the shiur, just that you shouldn't lose there's a halacha of eruv from the little children, that they shouldn't forget in future generations that there is such a law of eruv, which there's much discussion what this statement actually means. But the primary eruv is with that of tchumen, and therefore we're going to be lenient by the shiur eruv, by eruv chatzeres, because really eruv chatzeres is not really the primary eruv, really eruv tchumen is. And be that as it may, we see we're more lenient by regarding eruv chatzeres, by the shiur eruv chatzeres, and therefore I would have thought to say that's why halacha gedivra mekel, that to tell even the initial making of the eruv tchumen is going to be lenient, like his halacha that you get 2,000 amas. Now the Gemara continues in a related discussion that regarding klal, regarding general halachic decisions, who do we rule like? B'Yaakov Reb Zeka Amar, they both say halacha Reb Kiva mechavera. Halacha falls like Reb Kiva wherever he disagrees with a colleague, we rule like Reb Kiva. And regarding Reb Yisi, we rule like even if many people are disagreeing with him. And when Rebbe disagrees with one colleague, we rule like him too. Now says the for what purpose did you say this teaching that we generally would rule like this Tana in all places. In other words, the Gemara's question is, does it actually mean that we're relying on that to rule like that, what's called Lamaisa? Or maybe, no, logic would tell us, but that would only be inferred, but not necessarily we specifically rely on that to be the halacha Lamaisa. So I actually have three different interpretations. Ravasi Amar, he says halacha, where Rashi says literally the halacha, and Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Zrika are coming to tell us that halacha l'maisa is going to be Rabbi Kiva whenever he disagrees with another Tana, we're going to rule like him, and Rabbi Yasi, even when a Rabbin disagrees with him, literally halacha l'maisa, we're going to pass him, we're going to rule like that. Now, Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, he says no matan. Matan means that we tilt it. So Rabbi Yaakov and Zrika are not literally telling us halacha l'maisa. We just tilt the ruling after Rabbi Yasi, even when there's a Rabbin disagreeing with him. So, in other words, when someone comes to ask us a shaila, an individual person will tell him to do like Rabbi Yasi. But to darshan in the shul, to give a lecture about it, then we're not going to do that. So that's what Rashi explains as matan. Rabbi Yisrael he says nirin. He says, no, actually we're never going to rule like Rabbi Yasi or Rabbi Kiva, whatever it is, even to an individual. But if someone did like Rabbi Yasi, we're not going to make him undo it, because ultimately we would say Rabbi Yasi would be the halacha like him. So although we don't darshan that, we don't even teach it like that, we don't rule like that, but if someone did like that, that's what it means according to Rashi is near. Now says the Gemara, Kalash Nazal Rabbi Yaakov B'Idi and Rabbi Yechon. In this same way that we had the teaching of Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Zreka, we also had this teaching of Rabbi Yaakov B'Idi, which again, according to either one of the three interpretations we just said, whether it means halacha or matan or nirin, would be the same thing regarding the next klal. Remeir Rabbi Yehuda, when you have a machlekes Remeir and Rabbi Yehuda, so then halacha is Rabbi Yehuda. Halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda over Remeir. When you have Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yasi, halacha is Rabbi Yasi. We follow Rabbi Yasi. Now, therefore, says the Gemara, you don't have to say, if you're following the cheshbon, you don't have to say when you have machlekes Remeir Rabbi Yasi, halacha Rabbi Yasi, because you paskin like Rabbi Yehuda over Remeir, and you paskin like Rabbi Yasi over Rabbi Yehuda, so therefore you're going to for sure paskin Rabbi Yasi over Remeir. Now, it's because as the Gemara says, Hashmak Rabbi Yehuda Lessa, if Remeir is not considered when he's disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda, so Malcolm Rabbi Yasi, do we have to say it's going to be considered by Rabbi Yasi if Rabbi Yasi is even over Rabbi Yehuda? Now, Aravasi says, Afani Lemid, he says, I also learned that when you have a machlekes Rabbi Yasi, Rabbi Shimon, halacha is Rabbi Yasi. The Amar Baba Rabbi Yechanan says, because when you have a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So Hashtag Malcolm Rabbi Yehuda, if you don't consider Rabbi Shimon when he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, so Malcolm Rabbi Yasi, do you have to say that you're not going to rule like Rabbi Shimon when he disagrees with Rabbi Yasi, because Rabbi Yehuda is over Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yasi is over Rabbi Yehuda, so for sure Rabbi Yasi is going to be over that of Rabbi Shimon. Now, but the following question, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon, which both of them actually get rejected over Rabbi Yasi and Yehuda, my word halacha will be between them. So the Gemara take a look, it's not clear who the halacha would be when you have a machlekes Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon. Now, this was all what's called klal, that we have guidelines how to follow, again, whether it means halacha, matan, nirin. But then the Gemara brings, which we're going to continue into the next daf, Amar Misharsha, he says, less lahani klali. We don't have these general categorical teachings, which we said before. We have plainly and plainly, halacha is like plainly in every single place. Says Rabbi Misharsha is not true. When it's logical to say like that master, we say like him, the halacha. When it's logical like the other one, we do like him. We don't just say that halacha is going to follow one time. Now, and that says the Gemara, no, the Misharsha, where did Misharsha get this from? How does he know that we reject these guidelines? So it says the Gemara, if you think, and this is why it came into our Gemara's discussion, because it relates back to halacha of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said on Daf Mem Beis, Rabbi Shimon he says, when we're talking about the three people that were sleeping by Ben Hashmashes on the road, and then they wake up, we said that according to those Tanam, the Ichke Dal Amas, and we said that they're overlapping with the middle guy. So Rabbi Shimon he says, what could this be compared to when you have three people that have their Tchum of Dal Amas on the road? You have three courtyards opening up to each other, and they all have their own entry into Rosh Hashanah. So he said, if the two outer courtyards have an Eruv with the middle one, so the middle one's permitted with them, the Hematar they're permitted with it, but the two outer ones are forbidden with each other. Now, the Rabbanan disagree with this teaching of Reb Shimon in the Brisa, and the Rabbanan say that all three are going to be forbidden, as we'll discuss later on. Now, it's halacha falls like this teaching of Reb Shimon in the Mishnah. Now, who is in the Brisa that disagrees with Reb Shimon? It's Rabbi Yehuda. Rashi gives two interpretations how we know it's Rabbi Yehuda, either because generally whenever you have machlekes Reb Shimon, generally his dispute, just like you have Bisham Besil, generally Reb Shimon's dispute is Rabbi Yehuda. Or a different monal interpretation, Rashi says, because in the Mishnah previously it had said Rabbi Yehuda Omer, when they came to regarding the Dal and Amos that a sleeping person has, that you have the Tanna Kama, says you get Dalet Amas. You have Rabbi Elazar who says you're somewhere in the middle, you're in the middle and you have 2 Amas on either side. And then the last teaching was, Rabbi Yehuda said, no, le'ezeruch sheyirtza. You get whichever direction you want to choose. Once you choose, you get that Dalet Amas. The next teaching in the Mishnah is, if you had 2 people that were sleeping, and then 3 people that were sleeping, and then it says, Reb Shimon, so obviously that Reb Shimon is coming to dispute the Tana who was right before him, which was Rabbi Yehuda. The big that as an A, the Gemara is assuming that the disputant of Reb Shimon in this halacha is Rabbi Yehuda. And Ba'amar, and you said, Rabbi Shimon, one of the klal you had previously said, when you have Machlekes Rabbi Shimon, you said halacha Rabbi Yehuda, and here you're telling me that halacha follows like Rabbi Shimon. Wait, didn't you tell me the klal is you follow like Rabbi Yehuda? And Lav Shloimy, no, obviously you see from this, it says Mashar should let lesson that we don't rule like the klal. Because if you did, how could you tell halacha like Rabbi Shimon? The dispute is Rabbi Yehuda. You said when you have Machlekes Rabbi Shimon, you say halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. Obviously we don't hold like these klal that you're saying. So the Gemara says, my question, what's the difficulty? And this is going to be the answer that the Gemara is going to continue giving again and again. Dilma Hechad Itmar, maybe where it said explicit halacha like Rabbi Shimon, Itmar, it is said like him. It's only Hechad Loy Itmar. If it wasn't said explicit, that is like him, Loy Itmar, it wasn't said. When do we say halacha is like the klal, when you have Machlekes Rabbi Yehuda, Shimon, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? Is when it wasn't said explicitly who the halacha is like. Then we'll go like Rabbi Yehuda. But of course, if you tell halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, of course halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, it doesn't reject the klal. So the Gemara says, Ela Radam Hodetna. So the Gemara is going to continue trying to bring a lot of different rayas, and it's going to have the same rejection again and again. So let's bring a Mishnah later on of the New Testament off to prove Rabbi Shash's point. The Mishnah says, Ir Shel Yachid, a city of an individual. V'nasa Shel Rab then becomes a public city. So Ma'arvin es Kula, you could go ahead and make an Erev in the whole city. But Shel Rab, V'nasa Shel Yachid, if it was a public city, and then it became a private city, which Rashi explains what that means to say is that the numbers of the people walking in the streets became less than 600,000. So now it's no more like Ir Shel Rabim, it's not like the Diglei Midbar, which had 600,000 people walking in the streets. Still, since originally it was a Ir Shel Rabim, it was a Ir Shel Rabim that you couldn't make an Erev throughout the whole city, even though now you have less than that. Ein Ma'arvin es Kuli, you can't make an Erev in the whole city, unless you leave on the outside of the Erev, Ki Ir Chadash Sheb Yehuda. Now, Ir Chadash doesn't mean a new city. There was a city in Judea that was called Chadasha, which you have to leave them out of the Erev, in which they had 50 dwellers. So, meaning you have to leave out of the Erev at least 50 dwellers that are not part of the Erev, so it should be recognizable to this former Ir Shel Rabim that you can't just make an Erev in the whole city, you have to do it Mavai by Mavai. Now, that's the Rabbi Yehuda. Shimon, he says, he says, no, it's sufficient to leave over, you don't have to leave over 50 houses. It's sufficient to leave over 3 courtyards, and each courtyard having 2 houses. Now, that was the machlekes that we have in the Mishnah later on this Masechta. But one thing says the Gemara, Shimon, wait a second. Who's disagreeing with him? It's Rabbi Yehuda. But you said Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda. Obviously, we don't hold these klalim because this is in this Mishnah is machlekes Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and you rule like Rabbi Shimon. And you told me the klal is you rule like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, my question, what's the difficulty? The Machanamim, and here also, when it said Allah is like Rabbi Shimon, of course Allah is going to be like him. It was only when it wasn't said who the Allah was like. Then we'll say like Rabbi Yehuda, but that doesn't contradict what we're saying, that when you don't have any explicit teaching, then we'll say the halacha is like the klal of going to be like Rabbi Yehuda. Something to discuss in today's Daf, and Eruvin Daf Nevav, was we had 2 teachings from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. One was halacha gediv Rabbi ben Nuri, which is that even which we say that you're going to get 2,000 amas for a sleeping person on the road. And the second teaching was halacha gediv Rabbi be'erev. So he said, wait a second. The question was, why do you need to have both teachings? So answer number 1 was that it's coming to tell you need halacha gediv ben Nuri to say even though he's disagreeing with the rabbin. Maybe you would have said halacha is not like him. And why do you need halacha gediv Rabbi be'erev? To tell you that, because even though we're ruling like him, but it's only as a leniency, meaning not for the halacha of cheftzei hefker, because that would be a stringency. For that, we're not going to say the halacha is going to be like Rabbi ben Nuri. Now, that the Gemara proved and says yes, because even by rabbinic law, we have to say this other teaching as a chiddush, which Rabbi's question was, wait a second, it's rabbinic law, why do you have to say a second teaching? And who cares about Yachad Makom Ram? So the Gemara proved 2 proofs. One is, as we find the halacha of me'es le'es by Anida, which you see from there, that even though there's rabbinic law, that Rebbe really would not have ruled like the lenient interpretation of Laza, only because he said, I'm not going to retract because it's a Shas Chag. And also we had an inference from the halacha is like a yachid we said the halacha is like a yachid by the mekel be'erev. Now the inference is that in general, you wouldn't go like the lenient interpretation. You see 2 proofs that you generally would not go like a Yacham Makaram, but rabbinic law, and therefore again that's why we have to say both these teaching, Halacha Rabbi Nuri, and to say that even though he's Yacham Makaram, and also Halacha Rabbi Be'erev, to say we'll only go like him as a leniency for the sleeping person, not as a stringency for the Chatzei Hafka. Then we have a second interpretation was that, the reason why you need to have both halachas is because to tell you that if you only had one, you would have said halacha Rabbi Mekel is by Yeruv Chatzeres. We have to say that halacha Rabbi Nuri even by Erev Tchumen. And why do you have to say what's the difference? Aren't they both rabbinic laws of Eruvin? No, as we see that it is more stringent because you cannot be chayv for someone shlebefana by the laws of Tchumen, and therefore we would have thought you can be more stringent. The third interpretation was that you do need both teaching was because if you only had halacha Rabbi Mekel, I would have thought to say that's by the shiur Erev. And that would come to say that no, even like Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, that's even chilas erev. And why would you say to differentiate? Because we do see, as we'll see later on in this Masech, that more stringent but chilas erev, that it's not sufficient with a kol shiur. Shiur is enough just to want a minute amount. When you're coming to make the erev, you have to have a shiur, and therefore you would have thought that that's more stringent. That's why we have to say halacha is going to be like Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. Then we said, which related back to the halacha of the Mishnah, that there are klom and halacha who we paskin like. Now we said different tanoim what the teachings are, and there were three interpretations of what that means. Either it means halacha, which we come to say and we actually darshan about in shul, or matin, which is that you're going to teach someone as an individual, you're going to rule like that, or nirin, which is only that you're not going to make him to be chayzer. And those are three different interpretations. What does it mean regarding these klal? But Rabbi Sharsha, he said that we don't hold of these klal. But then the Gemara is going through that saying that they're not proofs of Misharsha, which that's why it came in, because Allah about Mishnah, where we rule like Rabbi Shimon, wait a second, but that's not like the cloud, because who is disputing Rabbi Shimon? It's Rabbi Yehuda, and you told me halacha, when you have machlekes Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. No, like we said, when it says explicitly that it's like Rabbi Shimon, of course we're going to go like that. It's only when it wasn't said explicitly, then we'll go like Rabbi Yehuda. And what's with the fact that we say Allah is like Rabbi Shimon by the Ir Shal Rab and Nasat Shal Yachid, we would say it's sufficient with Gimel Chatzeres on the outside, and you don't have to have like Rabbi Yehuda that's going to be the Ir Hadash. So don't you say Allah is like Rabbi Yehuda? Again, it's Heichad Itma Itma. When you say Allah is like Rabbi Shimon, we're going to say like that. Our cloud was only when there was Heichad Itma, then we'll say like, and there's no difficulty. Thank you to any time for hosting us.